The more brutal the discard, the more the avoidant cares. Here's why. It's one of the most confusing and painful things you'll ever experience. One moment, you feel deeply connected to someone. The chemistry is real, the intimacy electric, and the emotional bond undeniable. And then suddenly it's over. Not with a calm conversation or a gentle goodbye, but with an emotional vanishing act so cold it leaves you questioning everything. The texts stop. The warmth disappears. You're left staring at a wall of silence, wondering how someone who once made you feel seen could now pretend you don't exist. But here's the paradox. The more brutal the discard, the more the avoidant actually cares. And that's what makes it so tragic. You see, avoidant attachment isn't about indifference. It's about fear. Fear of vulnerability, fear of dependency, fear of being hurt again. The avoidant's entire nervous system is wired to equate closeness with danger. So when they begin to care deeply, their brain interprets it as a threat. The closer they feel to you, the more exposed they feel. That emotional intensity, the same passion that draws you together, also triggers their deepest panic. To protect themselves from being engulfed, abandoned, or emotionally devoured, they flip the switch. They run. But they don't just walk away. They obliterate the connection. Because to them, cutting it off completely feels safer than feeling that vulnerable again. When an avoidant cares only a little, they may fade gently, send fewer texts, or create a little distance. But when they care deeply, the discard is often sudden, sharp, and ruthless. They might block you, ghost you, or act cold and dismissive, not because you meant nothing, but because you meant too much. The intensity scares them. They can't handle the emotional flood, so they slam the door shut to stop the feelings from taking over. It's like their heart is on fire, and instead of learning to sit in the warmth, they pour gasoline on it just to make it stop burning. That's why the most brutal discards often hide the most emotional chaos underneath. Behind that cold exterior, the avoidant is spiraling. They replay conversations in their mind. They stalk your social media from fake accounts. They reread old messages, not to reconnect, but to remind themselves why they had to leave. Because the guilt eats at them. Their logical mind tells them, you're doing the right thing. You need distance. But their emotional mind whispers, you've just lost something real. This internal tug of war becomes unbearable. So to silence the guilt, they lean into their defensive story, that you were too much, too demanding, too emotional. It's easier to blame you than to admit that intimacy terrifies them. But here's the hidden truth. The brutality of the discard is often a mirror of the depth of their emotional investment. The avoidant has no blueprint for handling closeness. To them, intimacy feels like losing control. And when they sense they're falling too deep, when the connection threatens to crack their emotional armor, they panic. That panic doesn't come from apathy. It comes from attachment. It's a paradox most people don't understand. The more they care, the more they run. The deeper the bond, the harsher the break. Because love, for an avoidant, doesn't feel safe. It feels like drowning. Imagine someone who spent their childhood being punished for having needs. Every time they reached out, they were rejected or shamed. Eventually they learned love equals pain. So as adults, when they meet someone who touches their soul, all those old fears resurface. The vulnerability feels unbearable. It's not you they're escaping. It's the ghost of every time they've ever felt powerless in love. So they do what they've always done, disconnect to survive. And in doing so, they break the very bond that could have healed them. What makes the discard feel so cruel is that the avoidant often acts like they never cared. They'll use logic to erase emotion. It wasn't working, they'll say. We're too different. But beneath that calm tone, their body is in chaos. Racing heart, sleepless nights, waves of anxiety. They just don't feel these things the way others do. Avoidants are masters of compartmentalization. They shove feelings into boxes and lock them away. But those feelings don't die, they fester. That's why, weeks or months later, you'll often hear from them again. A random text, a like on your post, a hey, how have you been? It's their way of testing if the door is still open. Not because they don't care, but because they care too much to fully face the loss. Here's what most people miss. When the avoidant discards you brutally, They're trying to regain control of something that made them feel emotionally powerless. Love makes them feel small, exposed, dependent. All the things their survival wiring rejects. So when they cut you off cold, it's not strength. It's panic in disguise. It's their way of saying, if I end this first, I can't be hurt. The tragedy is that by protecting themselves from imagined pain, they create real pain for both of you. And later, when the emotional floodgates reopen, they feel the full weight of what they've lost. But by then, it's often too late. If you've ever been discarded by an avoidant, you've probably asked yourself, how could they be so heartless? But the truth is, they weren't heartless. They were terrified. The very intensity that made your connection beautiful was also what made it unbearable for them. When they looked at you, they saw someone who could truly see them. And that's something they've spent their whole lives avoiding. You reached a part of them no one else had, and that scared them more than losing you ever could. So they did the only thing they knew how to do, destroy the connection before it destroyed their sense of safety. But here's what's ironic. The avoidant doesn't escape the pain. They just delay it. It creeps back slowly, through loneliness, through regret, through dreams they can't shake. The image of you, the sound of your voice, the way you made them feel seen, it all returns in flashes. And because they never learned how to process emotions, they end up haunted by them. The very feelings they ran from start chasing them. That's why so many avoidants circle back. Not because they suddenly love you more, but because the love never truly left. It just got buried under fear. And for you and the one left behind, understanding this truth can be both painful and freeing. Painful because you realize they didn't stop caring. Freeing because you finally see their discard for what it really was, an act of self-preservation, not rejection. You weren't unlovable. You were too close to the part of them that still longs for connection but doesn't know how to handle it. You triggered both their deepest desire and their deepest fear. That's a storm they weren't ready to weather. So when you think about that brutal discard, the silence, the coldness, the sudden detachment, don't mistake it for a lack of feeling. It was an explosion of suppressed emotion disguised as indifference. It was care wrapped in fear. It was love running from itself. The avoidant doesn't know how to leave gently when they care deeply. They only know how to sever completely because partial goodbyes mean emotional exposure. And that's their worst nightmare. But if you want real closure, here it is. Their discard says more about their limits than about your worth. The brutality was a reflection of their emotional panic, not your failure. The more they cared, the harder they had to run to feel safe again. And someday, when the silence echoes too loudly, when the loneliness starts to sting, they'll realize what they destroyed wasn't a threat. It was love trying to reach them. Because the truth is, the avoidant's greatest tragedy isn't that they hurt you. It's that in trying not to feel their pain, they end up losing the very connection that could have healed it. And the more brutal their discard was, the deeper the wound they're trying to hide. So remember, the avoidant who left you cold didn't stop caring. They cared so much they couldn't bear to face it.